while I was saying goodbye to my father at his funeral, the HOA decided to cut my 100-year-old oak tree clean in half. The move blew up in such an unexpected way that the stump has now become the most photographed spot in the county. This wasn't just any tree. My great-grandfather planted it himself in 1923, and for 4 generations it stood in our family photos like a silent witness to our lives. On the very day I laid my father to rest, the HOA president decided it was the perfect opportunity to slice it down the middle, as if she were splitting logs for winter. I pulled into my driveway that evening, emotionally wrecked, and there she was, Christine Cartwright, looking immaculate, standing beside the remains of our family heirloom, with a smug smile and a clipboard stuffed with emergency work orders. The tree stood there like a bizarre art piece, half alive, half gone, completely unreal. Here's the thing about destroying something beautiful. Just to be spiteful, it often just makes people see the ugliness in you instead. What would you do if you came home, while grieving, to find your century-old family tree mutilated? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if your HOA has ever done something this outrageous. Let me introduce myself. I'm Derek Holbrook, 52, an electrician, 3rd generation to live in the same house my grandmother bought back when this was cotton fields and optimism. My home's a 1947 Craftsman with big porches, built-ins, and morning light that filters through century-old oak leaves onto my kitchen table. The whole place smells of sawdust and strong coffee, the kind of scents that soak into your bones. After 75 years, that oak out front, my great-grandfather planted it with his bare hands in 1923, the year he came back from the trenches in France. He said he needed to create something beautiful after witnessing too much horror. Every milestone in our family happened under those branches' first steps. Graduation photos, my wedding picture from a time when I still believed in forever. When Dad got sick, he'd sit under that tree each morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb through the leaves. I spent 2 months watching cancer consume the strongest man I knew. The divorce papers came 3 weeks before his diagnosis. Apparently, my wife's in sickness and in health clause had a limit. That house and that tree stopped being just property. They became my last tie to everything that mattered. The trouble started about 15 years ago, when the farmland got swallowed up by developers in suits. They christened the new neighborhood Willowbrook Estates because apparently nothing says classy suburb like naming it after trees you bulldozed. McMansions sprouted all around my grandmother's place, and soon enough, an HOA appeared. To protect property values, my home was grandfathered in with voluntary compliance, which is about as optional as a root canal if you're into pain. Enter Christine Cartwright, clipboard in hand, ambition in her eyes. She moved from California 6 years back, ran for HOA president the moment she unpacked, and won like she was aiming for global domination. Real estate agent, naturally, her 4,800 square foot beige palace at the end of the cul-de-sac looked like even the welcome mat had an Ivy League degree. The click of her manicured nails on her clipboard became the neighborhood's unofficial air raid siren, that the friendly letters started rolling in, if you count HOA letterhead threatening legal action as friendly. My grass was a 1/4 inch too high, my mailbox the wrong shade of black. Apparently, midnight and obsidian are different to people with too much free time. My work truck violated some buried clause about commercial vehicles. But the tree, that became her fixation. She insisted a branch hung 2 inches into my neighbor's airspace, as if we were negotiating international borders. I'd had it professionally trimmed 6 months earlier, but she came with her tape measure, recording every angle like she was solving a murder. On the morning of Dad's funeral, I left before sunrise for the service 2 hours away, leaving my spare key with Mrs. Olivier, 3 years old, sharper than a tack, and more observant than the NSA. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect, strangers reading stock phrases, while my brother and I tried not to fall apart in stiff, mothballs-smelling suits. I got home just as the desert sunset turned everything gold. Gravel crunched under my tires, far too loud in the quiet. That's when I saw it, my family tree, chainsawed straight down the middle. Not removed, not even trimmed. Just bisected, like some deranged art installation. Christine was there, tablet in hand, ordering cleanup crews, while the smell of fresh sawdust mixed with diesel hung heavy in the air. She waved an emergency work order at me, claiming imminent danger to the neighborhood. Neighbors started gathering, watching like it was a car crash. I realized this wasn't about maintenance, this was personal. Christine announced to the crowd that 3 neighbors had reported dangerous branches. I demanded to see the complaints. Privacy concerns, she said, hugging her tablet. Like nuclear codes. She couldn't resist showing her evidence. Photos, measurements, contractor estimates, like she was presenting a true crime documentary. This tree was trimmed by a licensed arborist 6 months ago, I told her, showing the proof on my phone. She laughed, not a chuckle, but a full-throated, gravelly cackle. That's adorable, Derek. Sue us. The HOA legal fund could buy your little house twice. But, while she gloated, neighbors started filming and sharing photos of the half-tree, spread online, people calling it accidental art and surreal beauty. Some said it looked like something Dolly might dream up. Christine, being Christine, tried to spin it. See? It's a dangerous distraction, she announced to the cameras. That night, I dug into HOA law until my eyes burned. Dad always said knowledge is the one tool management can't take from you. I found the catch: non-life-threatening emergencies require 72 hours written notice. Exceptions only apply if someone's in immediate danger. A tree that survived the Great Depression doesn't turn deadly on funeral day. The next morning, Mrs. Olivia came over with the smoking gun. Her security cameras had caught Christine measuring the tree at 7:03 a.m., hours before she even filed the emergency order at 2:17 p.m., and well before the chainsaw started. Planned the whole thing like D-Day, Mrs. Olivia said, handing me a USB drive of crystal-clear footage. The math was easy enough, for kindergartners can't start emergency work before filing the emergency paperwork. Soon, tourists began showing up to photograph the art installation. Tour buses rolled in. Local cafes launched half-tree lattes. The newspaper ran a feature. Christine doubled down, calling it proof of liability hazards. But the internet wasn't buying it. Old HOA horror stories about her started resurfacing. The family she targeted for parking their wheelchair van, the veteran she cited for a too large flag. I sat beneath the wounded branches at sunset and realized she thought she was teaching me about compliance. Instead, she'd shown me exactly how bullies expose themselves when they think no one's watching. Game on. 3 days later, I got a fat envelope HOA cease and desist papers accusing me of harassment and defamation. She even attached a list of violations. My truck, my mailbox, my garage projects, each with escalating fines. But her master plan hit a Texas-sized pothole. My mutilated tree had gone from neighborhood gossip to full-blown tourist attraction. The local visitors site listed it alongside the world's largest ball of barbed wire and a cactus-shaped restaurant. Neighbors started making money off the traffic, bathroom fees, lemonade stands, even the grumpy teens were selling bottled water, at ridiculous prices. That's when Pristine made her next calculated move. She called code enforcement to report my supposed unauthorized commercial enterprise. Never mind that I wasn't charging a dime or controlling who wandered over with cameras. In Pristine's world, logic was purely optional. Mr. Holbrook, the code enforcement officer, began, glancing down at a clipboard that looked suspiciously like Pristine's favorite accessory. You'll need to stop attracting visitors or risk violations for operating in a commercial zone. I was seconds away from arguing when Mrs. Olivia appeared like a petite Korean fairy godmother, armed with game-changing intel. She'd been doing some quiet sleuthing, bless her hand, had unearthed something beautiful. Pristine's brother-in-law owned the landscaping crew that butchered my tree. $3,200 for a half-day's work, Mrs. Olivia declared, waving printed financial statements like she'd just dug up buried treasure. No competitive bids, no board approval. Pristine just wrote a check to family. That night, fueled by insomnia and righteous fury, I dove into HOA financial regulations online. My electrician's brain should have caught it sooner. Any emergency expense over $500 requires board approval and competitive bids, always, even during real emergencies. I called Jake Morrison first thing in the morning. He'd already heard about the tree through the legal grapevine. Apparently, he said, chainsawing heritage trees during funerals is quite the headline in attorney circles. She paid her brother-in-law $3,200 without board approval. He asked. I could practically hear him grinning. That's not just breaking procedure, that's possible embezzlement. While I built my case, Pristine went on the offensive with a full-blown smear campaign. Anonymous complaints about my electrical work started popping up at job sites like weeds after rain. Safety inspections just happened to appear every time I posted updates about the tree. Rumors circulated that I'd gone unstable after my father's death, using grief as an excuse to harass innocent board members. It was psychological warfare, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Neighbors who once waved now stared at their shoes when I drove by. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd once brought casseroles during Dad's illness, suddenly found urgent gardening chores whenever I appeared. Then the note started. Dollar store paper, block letters in a handwriting that looked like a third grader's. Messages like, drop the lawsuit or it gets worse. Trees aren't the only things that get cut down. Smart people know when to quit. I found them under my windshield wipers, shoved through my mail slot, even taped to my front door. The paper was rough and scratchy, the kind that gives you paper cuts if you're not careful. Whoever wrote them was either dim-witted or desperate. But Pristine's piece de resistance came when Channel 7 ran an investigative segment titled HOA Overreach. When tree trimming goes too far, she couldn't resist the spotlight peering on camera in her best power blazer, wearing her most practiced concerned citizen expression. The reporter asked about the timing, why emergency powers were necessary exactly on the day of my father's funeral. Pristine's response was an orchestra of bureaucratic doublespeak about unfortunate coincidences and safety priorities outweighing personal scheduling conflicts. Personal scheduling conflicts. She'd just called my father's funeral a scheduling conflict on live TV. Watching the replay that night, I realized she'd just handed me the smoking gun. Bullies can survive a lot, but not having their cruelty broadcast to thousands of people who know the difference between emergency tree removal and petty revenge. The comments section lit up like the 4th of July, and none of it was on her side. The next morning, Pristine called an emergency HOA meeting, not the sleepy monthly kind where 3 people argue about trash can placement. A real one, with formal notices and everything. The topic: declare my tree a public nuisance, and authorize its removal. She'd learned absolutely nothing from the interview backlash. The meeting was set for Thursday night at the community center of beige, soul-sucking box with flickering fluorescent lights that made everyone look half-dead, squeaky folding chairs, and the faint scent of industrial cleaner mixed with broken dreams. Pristine had come prepared. Rallying supporters with surgical precision, she brought a professional landscaper to testify about structural instability and liability concerns. Armed with property value stats and a petition signed by 37 people demanding immediate action, her landscaper, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, testified that my half-tree was compromised and might fall without warning, ignoring my certified arborist's report stating it was sound. But he wore a tie and had PowerPoint slides, so apparently that made him credible. I'd been busy too. That morning, I'd gone to the county courthouse and dug up the original 1947 property deed. Sometimes the best way to fight new bureaucracy is with old bureaucracy. Jackpot, an environmental protection clause requiring preservation of significant mature trees. My oak was specifically mentioned as a heritage specimen to be protected in perpetuity. Jake drove down from Phoenix with copies of the deed and a briefcase full of legal precedent, the room filled like a prize fight, Pristine's backers up front. Mostly newer residents swayed by her property value spiel, and my supporters scattered throughout. Long-time locals, news-inspired visitors, and Mrs. Olivia in the front row with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet, documenting every violation since Pristine took office. Pristine opened like a prosecutor, complete with charts and photos of tourists taking selfies. This tree has become a circus, she declared. Property values are dropping. Children can't play safely. Something must be done. Jake rose, briefcase in hand, voice cutting through the room. Before this board votes, he said, you need to see this. He produced the deed like a magician's ace card. This tree is protected under the original environmental covenant. Removing it requires city permits, environmental studies, and historical committee approval. Room went silent except for the fluorescent buzz. Pristine's face cycled through colors like a chameleon in crisis. Jake went on, outlining how the emergency cutting was illegal under city and state laws and that the $3,200 no-bid contract to a board member's relative was not just a violation, but potential embezzlement. Someone in the back started clapping. It spread. Within seconds, half the room was applauding, while Pristine sat frozen. The vote was postponed indefinitely. 3 board members resigned during the recess. And Pristine, she sat staring at the deed, finally seeing what checkmate looks like. The real break came 3 days later, when Jake's team finished their forensic deep dive into HOA finances. Sit down for this, he told me. Turns out my tree's destruction wasn't random, revenge, it was a cover-up. The 1987 development agreement had the same environmental protection clause. Any mature tree over 50 years old was protected by county law. My oak was named in the original survey as a heritage specimen perpetually preserved. The HOA's insurance company had flagged it during their annual review. Damaging it could bring $50,000 in penalties. Pristine had known for months. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was destroying evidence before the audit hit. And the audit would have uncovered something bigger. $47,000 in no-bid. HOA contracts to her relatives, her brother-in-law's landscaping, her cousin's fence business, even her unemployed nephew's fake consulting firm. The tree wasn't about spite, It was about eliminating proof before the insurance company found out and before the financial investigation exposed her. Embezzlement. Mrs. Olivia delivered the final nail. Security footage showing pristine meeting with the landscaping crew 2 weeks before my dad's funeral, handing over cash. No checks, no paperwork. By then, the insurance company had flagged the irregularities for immediate investigation. Her real estate license was under state review. Her husband had quietly filed for divorce, likely trying to shield his assets. It all clicked. The harassment wasn't about HOA nitpicking. It was about pushing me out before I could connect the dots. The tree cutting wasn't vengeance. It was evidence destruction. The threats weren't intimidation, they were panic. Pristine wasn't just a petty neighborhood tyrant. She was a cornered criminal caught mid-heist. How much trouble is she in? I asked. Jake laughed, a sound that could have powered a small city. Felony counts for embezzlement, fraud, destruction of protected property, and filing fake emergency reports. Civil penalties for restoration costs, punitive damages, and mounting legal fees. Professional sanctions that would strip her of her real estate license. And once her husband's divorce lawyers were done, she'd be staring down personal bankruptcy. The woman who thought she was schooling me on HOA rules was about to get an advanced seminar in consequences. The irony was delicious. If she'd just kept her hands off my tree, none of this would have surfaced. But her own greed and panic had sparked the very investigation destined to ruin her. Sometimes karma doesn't just arrive, throws the truck in reverse, and runs over you twice. For emphasis, Jake's office smelled of leather-bound law books and coffee. So pricey it could rival a month's car payment. We spread ourselves across his conference table like generals plotting an invasion. Except instead of storming beaches, we were preparing to dismantle a suburban embezzlement ring. Three-pronged approach, Jake said, pulling out battered legal pads that looked like someone had shredded them and then painstakingly taped them back together. Criminal charges, civil suit, HOA governance reform. We hit her from every direction until she's got nowhere left to hide. The criminal case was practically building itself. The DA had launched a formal probe after Jake handed over financial records revealing fake contracts, embezzlement, fraud, property destruction, and falsified emergency reports. Pristine was now facing more counts than a mob accountant. But the civil suit, that's where we'd make her bleed financially. Damages for destroying the tree, punitive awards for her bogus emergency stunt, compensation for emotional distress from doing it during my father's funeral, and legal bills rocketing upward like a Saturn V. Conservative total, 75 grand. And that was before adding pain and suffering. Jake fanned out stacks of financial records like a poker dealer. The beauty here is her insurance company's going to abandon her. Fraud voids coverage. They'll cut a check to us faster than defend her crimes. Mrs. Olivia had become our de facto intelligence officer, compiling 3 years' worth of every HOA rule Pristine had broken. Her files color-coded, cross-referenced, and so thorough they could make the FBI blush. Included every email, every meeting note, every suspicious transaction. She approved 18 no-bid contracts, Mrs. Olivia said, nudging her glasses up her nose like a professor. Total, 47,300, all to family. No board approval. The Historical Society supplied expert testimony about the Oak's heritage, backed by records dating to 1923, newspaper clippings about my great-grandfather's return from France, property surveys marking the original planting, and even 1940s aerial photos proving it predated every building in the neighborhood. In 2 weeks, I'd learned more property law than most people pick up in a lifetime. Emergency powers must be documented within 24 hours, pristine, filed 3 days late. Environmental protections always override HOA rules. Insurance subrogation. That means your insurer turns into your attack dog when clawing back money from crooks. The sweetest part was watching her support crumble. 3 board members resigned to dodge liability. Her landscaper lawyered up and started cooperating. Even her brother-in-law claimed she'd misled him about the legality of chopping down the tree. My insurance company became an unlikely ally, running their own investigation into her fraudulent claim. Their forensic accountant documented every irregularity, every procedural breach, every abuse of power. When insurers smell fraud, they're hungrier than sharks in a feeding frenzy. The media was piling on. Our local paper planned a deep dive on HOA corruption. Channel 7 was prepping a follow-up on her charges, and even a documentary filmmaker from Phoenix wanted to feature the saga. I'd taken a community college public speaking course, figured if I was going to testify, I might as well sound credible. I learned how to keep calm under hostile cross-examination, present evidence clearly, and explain legal terms in plain language. The emotional prep was harder. Digging through family photos to prove the oak's significance meant reliving decades of moments. Dad as a boy climbing those branches, my wedding under its canopy, generations of birthdays and graduations beneath its shade. We timed it all perfectly. Criminal referral aligned with the civil filing. Media coverage synced with the city council's heritage tree hearing. Everything would land at once. A perfect storm of legal and public pressure. Jake had contingency plans for every twist, alternate legal arguments if criminal charges fell through. Backup strategies if the civil suit stalled, asset freezes if she tried to flee. But my favorite part was simple: letting pristine self-destruct. Every panicked move created new evidence. Every lie was documented. Every threat became another charge. The thing about criminals, Jake said, packing his briefcase like a man who'd just built the perfect mousetrap, is they always think they're smarter than they are. She's going to keep digging until she hits the Earth's core. Game time was coming. We were ready. Her first counterstrike after the records went public was hiring Kellerman Banks and Associates, a firm that billed more per hour than most people make in a week. Their Phoenix offices had mirror-polished marble floors and receptionists who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion spread. Her plan: challenge everything, the heritage tree status, the audit, even my deed. If you can't win on facts, bury the other side in paperwork and legal costs. Classic scorched earth tactics from someone who'd torched the whole neighborhood before admitting fault. But dropping big money on attorneys while under embezzlement investigation tells prosecutors one thing: you've got hidden assets and no intention of cooperating. The DA's office upgraded her case to felony status so fast it made flight risk sound like an understatement. That's when the psychological warfare kicked in. Anonymous flyers littered neighborhood car windshields, accusing me of exploiting Dad's death for profit and tanking property values with a frivolous lawsuit. The paper was cheap, the print smelled faintly of desperation. Coincidentally, code enforcement started getting anonymous calls about my supposedly overgrown grass, illegally parked truck, and unpermitted electrical work. Each claim triggered an inspection. Each inspection wasted my time. Each report came back clean. Then came vandalism, my work truck's tires slashed in the Home Depot lot, for brand new Michelins destroyed with surgical precision. Security cameras magically offline for the exact 20-minute window. Mrs. Olivia's cameras, however, caught a shadowy figure at 3 a.m. skulking around my yard with what looked like landscaping tools the same night. Someone tried finishing the job on my tree. They'd made a few test cuts before realizing that destroying evidence under federal investigation isn't wise. They left behind sawdust, motor oil, and a gasoline scent. The suspect pool? About 3 people, all related to Pristine. Her media spin crashed harder than a 70s Pinto. She gave Channel 7 a tearful interview about being persecuted by a grieving man out for revenge, complete with fake tears and rehearsed outrage. Reporters, like bloodhounds, kept digging. The follow-up exposed her history of targeting homeowners who defied her 3 families had sold their homes rather than endure her harassment. 2 elderly residents were cited for rules that didn't even exist. The newspaper's legal columnist skewered her in print, calling her the poster child for HOA corruption. When unelected officials think they're above the law, he wrote, homeowners become prisoners in their own neighborhoods. Then my insurance company hit gold. 5 years of bogus claims tied to her family businesses, fake storm damage, exaggerated vandalism, even a stolen landscaping tool set that reappeared a week after the payout. On a Thursday morning, the FBI arrived at her door with warrants. Running HOA money through fake contractors via the Postal Service? That's mail fraud, and federal prosecutors play for keeps. That night, I sat beneath the battered oak, watching the sunset blaze gold and orange, listening to her perfect little empire crumble. Her high-priced lawyers were about to find out defending him gets much harder when the client keeps committing fresh crimes. Mid-investigation, she'd thought she was swatting a fly. In reality, she'd poked a bear, and bears don't take kindly to threats against their cubs. The next phase promised to be even more entertaining. Her final gambit? Calling an emergency meeting to declare the HOA bankrupt and dissolve the board, hoping to funnel its assets into a shell company before the investigators could seize them. Her scheme had all the subtlety of a toddler hiding stolen cookies by eating them. The meeting notice landed on a Friday for a Monday morning, gathering technically within the rules, but obviously meant to keep turnout low. She picked 7 a.m. at the community center, counting on most residents being busy with work or school runs. Classic strong-arm strategy, change the rules when no one's paying attention. But in a neighborhood where someone's been taking a chainsaw to private property, word spreads fast. By Sunday night, local social media was flooded with meeting details and calls for a massive turnout. Mrs. Olivia even put together a phone tree so efficient it could give the Pentagon's communications network a run for its money. Monday arrived, with the kind of desert heat that melts asphalt and shortens tempers. The community center lot was jammed like a political rally car's pickups, and at least 3 news vans with satellite dishes stretching toward the sky like mechanical sunflowers. Inside, Pristine sat at the head table, looking like she'd aged a decade in the last 2 weeks. Her signature blazer was creased. Her once perfect hair showed gray at the roots, and her hands trembled as she shuffled papers that probably contained more fiction than the local library. Due to rising legal costs and frivolous lawsuits, she began addressing a crowd filling every chair and lining the walls. The board has no choice but to declare bankruptcy and dissolve this HOA. The response was instant and loud. Shouts of, "Show us the books," bounced off the walls, while Pristine hammered her gavel like she was driving railroad spikes. The air was thick with the smell of too many people crammed together. Nervous sweat mixing with industrial disinfectant that never quite masked the building's underlying mustiness. That's when Jake stood up from the back row, briefcase in hand. wearing a smile that would make any defense lawyer reach for antacids. "Before this board takes any action," he said, his voice slicing through the chaos, "I have some documents the entire room might find enlightening." He strolled to the front like a man holding a royal flush. "Mrs. Cartwright've been served." The papers landed on the table with a satisfying thud, followed by his calm recitation: criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and destruction of protected property, a civil suit for over $75,000 in damages, a federal investigation into mail fraud and racketeering. Pristine's complexion cycled faster than a time-lapse sunset: white, red, green, then back to white like someone was flipping channels on her face. Jake went on, clearly savoring the moment. "Any attempt to dissolve this HOA or transfer assets while under federal investigation will be considered obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Injunctions have already been filed to prevent it." Only then did the crowd notice the FBI agents quietly sitting in the back, documenting her every move in real time. Witness tampering and obstruction charges now added to her growing rap sheet. But the real showstopper came when Detective Rodriguez from the county sheriff's office stepped forward, handcuffs glinting under fluorescent lights. "Pristine Cartwright, you're under arrest for embezzlement of public funds, filing false emergency reports, and destruction of protected environmental resources." The click of those cuffs was sweeter than Christmas morning bells. Her carefully constructed image collapsed completely as she was led out, high-priced lawyers scrambling behind her like puppies chasing a fire truck. The room erupted: cheers, applause, camera flashes, phones recording everything. Somewhere in the chaos, Mrs. Olivia was high-fiving people half her age while clutching the folder of evidence that helped take down the neighborhood's tyrant. The battered remnants of the board voted unanimously to cooperate with investigators and implement open-book financial procedures. The bankruptcy motion died faster than a vampire in sunlight. With emergency audits scheduled for the next week, outside, reporters swarmed like bees to spilled honey. The questions came rapid-fire: how it felt to see justice, the fate of the tree, whether this was HOA overreach or something bigger. I let Jake handle the legal details, but when a reporter asked what I'd learned, I gave them the line that ended up replayed on every local news segment: bullies count on good people staying quiet. The second you shine a light on them, they scatter like roaches when you flip on the kitchen light. That evening, sitting under my half-tree with a cold beer, watching Karma give a masterclass in consequences, I realized it wasn't just about saving my family's legacy. It was proof that regular people can fight corruption and win even when the system seems rigged. Sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath. He gets him arrested for tax evasion, too. City Council hearing, Wednesday by 5 p.m., the chamber was packed tighter than sardines at a fish convention. Media crews had transformed the place into a mini TV studio: lights, cameras, and enough cables to power a small town. Pristine sat in the front row in an orange jumpsuit that clashed badly with her skin toner. Apparently, the county jail isn't big on fashion advice. She'd made bail that morning, just in time to watch her empire collapse before half the county and 3 news crews. The Historical Society presented first, armed with archival evidence that could impress the Smithsonian photos from 1925. Land surveys showing the tree's protected status, even soil tests proving its age and environmental value. A retired professor, looking like he'd stepped straight from a history textbook, spoke with the kind of authority that makes politicians sweat. "This oak tree is more than just botanical heritage," he said, pointing to enlarged photographs of my great-grandfather planting the sapling. It's a living record of this region's agricultural history. Destroying it is like defacing a natural monument. Next came the certified arborist, explaining that the surviving half could thrive, with proper care. His slideshow detailed recovery timelines, restoration techniques, and projected growth patterns, making the tree sound like a patient coming back from surgery. Then the district attorney's representative dropped the bomb. Pristine had been formally charged with 6 felonies, including embezzlement, environmental destruction, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Federal investigators had also uncovered mail fraud and tax evasion, stretching back years. The room fell silent. Even her outrageously expensive lawyer, whose hourly rate probably rivaled a month's rent, looked like he'd rather be on Mars. During a dust storm, Councilwoman Martinez asked if Pristine had anything to say in her defense. What followed was a meltdown for the ages. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked, voice cracking. "That tree was dangerous. I was protecting this community." She ranted about media conspiracies, insurance scams, and federal plots, convinced she was the only one smart enough to understand property values. When she began accusing random audience members of being paid agitators, security moved in. The irony of a California transplant calling lifelong Arizonans outsiders was lost on Herbert, not on the crowd. I stood up, the room hushed, cameras turning to me, double quotes, "Mrs. Cartwright," I said, into the microphone. "You cut down my family's 100-year-old tree while I was burying my father. You stole from neighbors who trusted you. You filed false emergencies and threatened anyone who questioned you." I paused. This was never about trimming trees or property values. It was about power and what happens when small people forget they're accountable to the community they claim to serve. The silence lasted about 10 seconds before slow clapping started in the back. It spread until the chamber thundered with applause, forcing the council president to gavel the room back to order. The vote was unanimous. Heritage designation granted, protective buffer approved, and a small memorial park authorized. The city attorney confirmed charges would move forward regardless of the HOA's finances, with full restitution required before any plea deals. Outside, reporters swarmed again. My closing quote made the evening news. "This was never about winning or losing. It's about the fact that in America, your neighbor can't erase your family's history just because they dislike your mailbox color. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it feels impossible." 6 months later, the half-tree had become a local landmark, drawing tourists from 3 counties. Historical markers and a volunteer-run gift shop raised over $50,000 annually for tree preservation programs. Pristine's downfall had turned my family's tree into a symbol of resilience. She eventually pled guilty to avoid a televised trial, earning 18 months in federal prison plus full restitution. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, her divorce finalized, and she was banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. The HOA itself underwent a full overhaul. New leaders campaigned on transparency, rewriting bylaws to require competitive bids over $500 and homeowner approval for emergency actions. Personally, life had taken a brighter turn. Sarah, Olivia's granddaughter and Historical Society volunteer, had become a regular at my kitchen table, helping plan the annual Heritage Tree Festival. While we traded stories over coffee, the tree's recovery was even studied by the local community college horticulture program. Its unique new canopy, shaped by survival, drew school field trips and inspired lessons on history, environmental care, and civic courage. Jake used our legal precedent to win 3 similar cases statewide. And the legislature passed HOA reform, laws requiring financial transparency and curbing emergency powers. My electrical business flourished from the publicity. But more importantly, I'd regained something I didn't realize I'd lost: purpose. Speaking at conferences about homeowner rights became a calling. The first Heritage Tree Festival celebrated everything pristine had tried to destroy: community spirit, personal rights, and the power of ordinary people to stand up to corruption. Families picnicked beneath the canopy, musicians played, artists displayed works inspired by the tree's story, and for generations of family photos now included that half-tree as a symbol of strength. The stats told the story best. Total recovery, including damages, $87,000. Economic impact from heritage tourism, over $200,000. HOA. Reform laws passed, using our precedent, 12 states similar. Cases won, using our strategy, 27 and counting, and the most important number, 1. Family tree, saved for future generations. Sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he gets him arrested, convicted, and sent to federal prison. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments, so we can fight suburban tyranny together. And don't forget to subscribe for the next David vs. Goliath tale, because next week's story features a corrupt mayor, a parking meter scam, and the most outrageous public records request in city history. If you enjoyed watching Karma Catch Up, hit that like button, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.